the sisters-in-law. Real sisters, real lawyers, really good talk. We're Janice and Davina Mathis, both lawyers and biological sisters from Greenville, South Carolina. And Janice now Executive Director of the National Council of Negro Women in Washington, D.C. And I am still here in Greenville, South Carolina.
And we have a guest this evening that we're very proud of. He is Mr. Robert Patillo. By trade, he is an attorney. He's a graduate of Chicago-Kent College of Law. He is a radio host himself at WXAG in Atlanta. And he is also the Atlanta and Southeast Region Bureau Chief for Reverend Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition. Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing, Janice?
I'm doing pretty good. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming on Sisters-in-Law tonight. We appreciate it very much. In the news this week, there have been stories about Haitian, they call them migrants. I think of them more as refugees because they certainly are seeking refuge. What are your thoughts about the situation on the border?
Well, I think this is a case where U.S. policy continues regardless of administration. There are certain things which are just America, regardless of if it's a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, or a liberal in office. And the mistreatment of Haitians is part of what makes America America. You can go back to the founding of Haiti as the one and only slave colony to ever revolt against a colonial power and win. And from that moment, there are letters and speeches from Thomas Jefferson talking about the fact they needed to crush Haiti in the cradle before that spirit of revolution moved on to the United States of America. The fear was that the Haitian Revolution would inspire slaves in the United States South to rise up against their colonial masters. Remember, in places like South Carolina, the enslaved population was greater than the free population at a certain point in its history. And so the fear was that Haiti would inspire not just American slaves, but those who were victims of European colonization worldwide to stand up against those European powers. This is why we have seen the policies against Haiti from the beginning. This is why we have seen the hundreds of billions of dollars of colonial debt that Haiti had to pay back to France during the course of the 18th century to keep them continuously in debt to European powers. This is why we've seen the U.S. occupation of Haiti, both from 1919 until the 1930s, and also from 1994 until 1997. This is why we've seen the President George W. Bush pick up President Aristide of Haiti and drop him off in the Congo and install his own government in the early 2000s. So the abuse of Haitian refugees, of course, is a human rights violation. But if there wasn't a cameraman there, this will be continuing to go on. Those horsemen didn't look like this the first time they've ever lassoed a black person. They looked like they were very experienced in rounding them up and immediately deporting them because that's the policy of the United States of America. And I think we in the African American community have to stand in solidarity of all those who exist in the diaspora. Because the abuse of one is the abuse of all. And if we see law enforcement abusing any person from the African diaspora, we have to stand up and make sure our policy leaders, particularly when the people we voted for are in office, that they understand the compassion and the need to actually handle this in a way to accommodate with the higher goals of America. Now, I'm Haitian American. My mom was born and raised outside of Port-au-Prince. And this has been the policy since she was a child, whether it was wet foot, dry foot, Cuban refugees versus American refugees, whether it was the Alien Gonzalez saga in the 1990s versus pushing Haitian refugees back into the ocean off of the coast of Miami. So we have to understand that this is part of American policy, and once you start understanding, then you can break that history going forward and actually create some reconciliation.
Robert, you hit the nail on the head when you said there weren't cameras previously, but our memories are very short. I do remember what you're talking about, Haitians coming in through the ocean, coming into Florida, and they were turned away. Cubans were accepted as if a refugee was not a refugee if he or she came from Haiti. Our memories are so short that we don't remember that. But looking at these pictures today, I know you're probably struck with horror like everybody else, seeing those officers on horseback whipping the Haitians. I believe you're right. It saddens me. It wasn't their first time. What do we do about this?
Well, I think we have to start pushing the Biden administration. Let's understand the midterm elections are coming. Kind of like Game of Thrones, winter is coming. So with that, we have to understand there are about 90 days left to really push forward an agenda that can actually get passed. Towards the end of the year, everyone goes into 2022 campaign mode, and nothing's going to get done. There will be no compromise. There has to be a comprehensive immigration reform package pushed in the Congress and pushed through, something that deals with asylum and the way that we process such, something that deals with the feeder systems, because in many ways it's American policy towards Central and South America and indeed Caribbean nations where we have spent the last century subjugating all those who are within our hegemonic rule. And there's something to be said for us fixing and repairing those nations, what the Chiquita Banana Company did during the Banana Wars, what we did during the war on drugs that are forcing these migrants to come north. Once you cut off the tap at the source, then you can have to work on regulating the system to ensure that people who are coming into the country are properly processed. You have the asylees who are accepted. We increase the cap on the number of refugees. America actually needs more immigration into the country. The birth rate for white people is down. The birth rate for black people is down. If we do not have robust immigration, the nation will begin graying and dying like we're seeing in Japan and other industrialized nations. So with that, we need to see the Biden administration take a real interest in dealing with some of these existential threats in Central and South America and in the Caribbean, and also putting in policies where we can stand up to the highest human rights ideals that the country has. I think it just struck all of us that literally at the same time that Joe Biden was before the UN lecturing Middle Eastern and countries in China on human rights, you're getting images of black people being roped by cowboys on the southern border and thousands of people not being processed into the country. So I think they have to make this a priority. If for no other reason than the largest Haitian American population in the country is in Florida, a swing state. Cubans are already not that fond of the Democratic Party. If you really want to turn Haitians also against the Democratic Party, which will sacrifice Florida, you'll basically take it off the board for the next generation or so. So we're going to have to see a focus on these issues, and we've seen a very lackluster response thus far. Kamala Harris was made the border czar earlier this year by the Biden administration. I still haven't heard an articulated policy from the administration as to exactly what they will do other than putting Band-Aids on these things. When it comes to migrant detention, asylum, and also a comprehensive immigration platform that can actually bring together all the nations in the hemisphere to solve this problem. This is a solvable problem. We just don't have the political will to do so.
Well, you said a mouthful. It seems like, to me, that Kamala was put in charge of it to get it off of Joe Biden. And whether there was a comprehensive policy or not, it wouldn't be Biden's fault, it would be Kamala's fault. It seems the Haitians have had a parade, a cavalcade of crises. The pandemic is one, hurricane, earthquake, one right after another. Is there any political will to help Haiti in their crisis?
Well, let's remember something. Ever since I was a kid, I always hear this, the kind of drumbeat in the media. Oh, poor Haitians. Haiti is so poor. No, Haiti, when it was a colony, was literally the richest colony in the Western Hemisphere. It has more natural resources than any other island nation in the entirety of the Caribbean. It sits at a strategic location where if you're shipping anything from the Andes or from Mexico or from Central America out to Europe or to the other hemisphere, you have a waypoint right there in Santo Domingo where you can have a port, do shipping, etc. The problem for Haiti has always been European interference. The $100 billion that Haiti had to pay France in reparations in the 19th century are what are holding Haiti back right now. We should be focusing as a nation on forcing France to repay that colonial debt to Haiti, which will do more to transform that island than anything that any aid work or anything that any humanitarian effort could do. Concurrently with that, however, we have as the U.S. being the hegemonic power again within this hemisphere, they're going to have to take that seriously. Ever since George Washington's farewell address and the Monroe Doctrine, they've always said they want Europeans and other Eastern Hemisphere nations to stay out of the dealings of this hemisphere. That being said, that means you're responsible. You cannot simply treat every other nation as a mercantilistic colony that's supposed to ship all their resources to America. You have a responsibility to ensure the safety, security, and the political stability of those nations. Part of that's going to be not kidnapping the president every 10 years. Part of that is not going to be having the DEA on the ground as soon as the president of Haiti, or before the president of Haiti was assassinated, and they're the first ones there to investigate, which seems very strange and fishy to many people in Haiti. To no longer have U.S. Funding of rebel leaders in Haiti, such as Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, who runs the G9 gang of Port-au-Prince, which makes it very difficult to have any sort of political stability. So the best things we can do is stop bothering those people, and then at the same time get France to give back their money, and they'll work it out.
Well, that's a good part of it. We're talking about France being our most long-standing ally. Is there any conversation that you know about between the President of the United States or any of our diplomatic corps and France and their diplomatic corps about doing something about repaying that money?
Absolutely not. Not in the slightest. These European nations are still European nations. The colonial powers are still colonial powers. If you start asking France about paying back reparations, then somebody's going to ask America about paying back reparations, and nobody wants to have that conversation. This is that point in time where we have to start flexing our political muscle as a community and stop being willing to sit on the back burner and accept what is given and rather take what is needed. That's kind of that message of the Haitian Revolution that Americans have been trying to tamp down for years. They want us, singing and holding hands, vote for this old white man versus this old white man, and you'll get what you want. The message of the Haitian Revolution is muskets and machetes get things done quickly. That's not the narrative that America and the Western world need to have. So when we are going to the polls, when we're going to the ballot boxes, we have to make sure to start making these political issues. We can no longer say, well, criminal justice reform, we're okay if that doesn't happen, you tried. Voting rights is okay if that doesn't happen, you tried. For the People Act, it's not going to happen, but at least you tried. We have to start demanding that they put points on the board the same way that they can push through this infrastructure bill. I want to see that same vigor, that same energy when it comes to issues affecting the African American community and members of the African diaspora.
They don't seem to be having much luck with the infrastructure bill. What would you do about the filibuster?
I think you have to get rid of the filibuster. The problem currently is that even without the filibuster, the Democrats don't have the votes. Even if you suspended the filibuster, you still need the entire Democratic caucus to get together on most of the big ticket agenda items. Right now, we know you don't have Manchin on police reform. You don't have Manchin on the For the People Act. You don't have him on the voting rights setting. You don't have him on the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill. Similarly, from the people I've talked to on the Hill, Manchin is kind of the fullback. He's the offensive line for a group of quote-unquote centrist Democrats who don't want to anger the progressive base, but also don't want to make themselves seem too radical and liberal. They want to stay in the center. Manchin is taking the heat. There's a group of 4 or 5 Democrats who wouldn't vote for any of this stuff either, but they're just simply letting Manchin and Sinema take all the political damage.
But don't you think that cover that the filibuster, the 60-vote rule gives them, makes them less likely to cooperate? Wouldn't they be under more pressure if the vote was closer, if you didn't have to get to 60? I was on a call when Manchin promised to go get those 10 votes and seemed utterly surprised when he couldn't get them. And so I think that we do need filibuster reform. I think it is specious to say that you live in a place where it's supposed to be majority rule, but 51 won't do it when you got a body of 100.
Well, it's interesting because we're beyond not just simply being anti-majority rule. Because we were a majority rule country, and for the last 30 years, Republicans have won the popular vote a grand total of 1 time, and that was in 2004. So if you have a 17-year-old at home, they've never seen a Republican win the popular vote. That's not the way that a functional democracy is supposed to work when you still have them in charge. The Republican senators represent 41 million fewer people than the Democratic senators. It's not a question of majority rules. Republicans have figured out how to work the referees and how to work the ropes in order to continue to have political power.
And how to storm the Capitol. And how to storm the Capitol and threaten to hang the vice president, too, while they at it.
And then as soon as they're done, they pretend it was just a tourist event and nothing was happening. This is what we saw in apartheid South Africa towards the end. when they figured out how to entrench themselves in the judiciary, entrench themselves in the bureaucracy of the nation in order to still have political power despite being in the population minority. These people are preparing for that singularity when we become a majority minority nation and understanding how exactly to still run the strings of power for the country. So of course we have to reform the filibuster, but at the same time we have to get some of these quote unquote centrist Democrats on board and understand, well, Joe Manchin is effectively just a lobbyist for the coal industry. So he's never going to vote for anything that has to deal with green energy because he is a lobbyist for the coal industry. He comes from a state which has no interest in black people. He could get not one black vote and probably still win there. So what interest does he have in upsetting some of his moderate MAGA voters by giving black people anything? And this idea that Democrats were going to trade off voter ID in order to get the For the People Act through. At that point, what exactly are we doing now? We're going to cut off our nose just to have a punic victory. You know, what exactly did you sacrifice to get that victory? So we're going. We need more presidential leadership. I feel like at this point. I know the Republican talking point has been, you know, where's Biden? Who's secretly pulling the strings on him? But I think we need a more energetic, a more active president.
You try hard not to help him, okay?
I try not hard not to help him, but the president has to get out here and he has to start doing. He kind of fashions himself.
Comprehensive immigration reform didn't they go try to get that in reconciliation?
They try to do DACA reform and reconciliation, not a comprehensive bill. So when we talk about
there's more than DACA in the immigration bill.
Well, I think in the reconciliation bill, I know there was DACA, I know there was guest visas, I know there was a reform to the asylum process, but because much of that was struck down by the Senate parliamentarians saying that those weren't spending issues. And when we go, and before we even get to American comprehensive immigration reform, we have to have a conversation within the entirety of the North American and Central American land masses on what we can do. Canada needs 20 million people. There are 20 million people in Central America who would like to be out of Central America. We could actually forge a negotiation as well as part of a trade deal and put it part of the new NAFTA deal, Trump called it the USMCA, where we could have a guest worker program where they transit through America. They get to Canada, work in the agricultural fields, they're able to return home, they're able to repatriate funds. That is a very similar to the European Union. You can create a apparatus of that nature which will solve the entire problem. But you have to sit down and talk between nations, and also you have to deal with the idiocy of the American war on drugs, because Mexico very rightly and Central American countries very rightly say you're talking about the drug cartels, but the thing funding the drug cartels is y'all snorting up everything in the United States of America. So if you fix your policy there, then you will effectively be defunding the drug gangs which are causing the migrant crises going north. But we have to be able to talk about these things as adults and not simply in political hyperbole, where Republicans are simply saying round them up and send them home, and Democrats are kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouths on the issue. You can't get to a real resolution unless you're having an actual conversation with an open mind and ready to have new solutions.
Well, I agree with you about the demographic need for immigration. Absolutely. I'm so delighted when I see brown people working hard in this country and paying Social Security taxes, because that means I keep getting my check for no other reason.
So we'll be talking to Southeast regional elected officials on the issue of voter suppression. That was very big earlier this year and kind of fell off the media stream of consciousness in recent months. But we are seeing nationwide in the wake of the 2020 election, Republican governors and Republican legislators passing the most draconian voting bills possible in order to help them skim to victory. We established earlier, they do no longer attempt to actually win more votes. They just need to figure out how to work the referees. And as Trump said in his call to the Georgia Secretary of State, I need you to find me 12,000 votes. And this is how they are finding him those votes. Donald Trump lost Georgia by 11,800 votes. That comes out to about 80 votes per county for the 159 counties in Georgia. So if you can just make it a little bit harder for 80 people in each county to vote, you effectively can change the president, change the 2 United States senators, change the entire legislative composition of the Western Hemisphere and the priorities going forward. That's all that it takes. A couple rural legislators playing around with the rules in order to change all those things.
You know, I'm fascinated by Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia. Do you think he can get reelected?
No, I don't think you can. We have to understand that you have 3 votes in Georgia. You kind of have a minimum of 3 voting coalitions in Georgia that have kind of sprung up. So you have the Democratic coalition on one side of the aisle, which is kind of this loose coalition between progressives, liberals, African Americans, Latinos, the LGBT community, white progressives, and the old school Dixiecrats. It's a very strange coalition on this side, but they figure out how to stitch it together in recent years after a decade of not being able to do so. On the other hand, you have the Republican coalition that previously was united, but now has been cleaved directly down the middle between the standard run-of-the-mill, Southern racist Republicans that we're used to, the good old Setsby Chamblises, those sorts of people, the Purdue's, those folks. And now you've got this new MAGA wing of the party. So Raffensperger falls into that traditional Southern Republican wing of the Republican Party, but the MAGA wing of the party is the wing of the party that has all the energy, that has all the get out the vote, that is motivating and filling up arenas and filling up stadiums. And but they follow a singular figure, being Donald Trump. So when Donald Trump tells you turn against this individual and attack, that's the person who's holding up everything. They unanimously turn and attack. The fact is that not only can Raffensperger currently not get reelected, Vernon Jones might beat Kemp. I know we all laughed at it at the beginning, the idea that Vernon Jones would be able to pose any sort of challenge to Kemp. But if a couple other people hop into the governor's race and split that vote, it ends up in a runoff between Vernon Jones and Brian Kemp. And Donald Trump is down here doing monster truck rallies for Vernon Jones on a regular basis around the state. Vernon Jones can win that race. So we're looking at the strengthening of the MAGA wing of the party and at the same time the diminution of the traditional Republican wing, because there is no standard bearer for the traditional Republicans. Mitch McConnell isn't filling up stadiums, isn't filling up arenas, and isn't fundraising for people. Mitt Romney isn't that type of iconoclastic figure. So there very well could be a sea change, particularly in the Republican Party of Georgia, but also the National Party, where they completely convert from what we grew up with Trent Lott and Strom Thurmond and those sorts of Republicans, the Bushes, George Will, those kind of people, and those go completely conspiracy theory, xenophobic, anti-science, anti-education. That wing of the party is where the actual power is, and that's the power base, and that's what Trump exploits.
One of the trends that we're seeing across the country is these races for Secretary of State, because they do control state elections, and there's legislation in Arizona that would empower the legislature to overturn the outcome of elections at the state level. That's a scary proposition.
Actually, the Secretary of State will have the power to overturn elections or to determine how votes are counted after they are cast, which is a scary proposition, put it in the hands of one person in that regard.
Hey, this is interesting. One thing I do like about Trump is he says the quiet part loud. So he said last year, in many cases, it's more important to pick who counts the votes than to get the actual voters. And that's what all this voter suppression the Republicans are doing right now is. They don't care about getting more voters. Republicans aren't doing get out the vote drives. They're not knocking on doors and passing out leaflets. No, they are working through their legislators to ensure that they get to pick their voters. That if in Texas, any random person can file a contest against a person voting, and they can throw that vote out. Any judge can throw out an election result and then have that rerun. In Georgia, the new law where the state legislature can come in and take over county boards of election, they think they're being mismanaged, was specifically created so they can take over Fulton County, because they know without Fulton County, this goes back to being a deep, dark red state, and this is why they want to take those things over. So even if we look at what's in the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, those bills are already too weak before they're even passed because they're not responsive to what Republicans are actually doing right now. They are still dealing with the fights we were having 15 and 20 years ago against Republicans. Republicans have shifted to a whole new battlefield, and Democrats have been caught off guard with it when it comes to them picking their voters instead of actually allowing the democratic process to go forward.
Well, actually, we've reached that day that the Rainbow Push that Reverend Jackson talked about 40 years ago. There really is a loosely bound together rainbow coalition, and we make the majority. And Republicans know that they cannot get the majority of voters, so they have to rig the process. They can't win fair and square, so they're going to change the rules altogether.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm finished.
It really is not a new trend. There was a book that came out several years ago called Democracy in Chains. This is a 50-year process. When you saw Citizens United, and all of a sudden, money was speech. And the more money you have, the more speech you're entitled to. This is not, it's on steroids now, I grant you that. The MAGA crowd has taken it and done more with it than anybody probably could have anticipated. But this is something that started right here in Virginia as they started to look at what 2040 would look like in the United States demographically. Does Warnock get reelected?
It's going to depend on a couple of things. One, right now, Democrats have absolutely nothing to run on in 2022. Now, what are the victories that you can tick off where you can get your base back out? Because at the end of the day, if you can't get your base out, you can't worry about getting swing voters or getting new people in. You got to get your base out first. So what do you hang your hat on? Do you hang it on the border with the slave catchers out there rounding up black people with ropes? Do you hang your hat on Afghanistan? Do you sending drone strikes that killed 10 children? Or the withdrawal where the planes are taking off and people are falling to their deaths?
Or 675,000 people dead from COVID.
Exactly. So the Democrats made really big promises in 2020 that many of us were hopeful on, many of which they can do with the strike of a pen. And I'm not quite sure why they haven't done so. Joe Biden can cancel all student loan debt tomorrow with the stroke of a pen, and then let the Department of Education figure it out. That doesn't require Congress. That gives you points on the board that you can run on in 2022. He can hold a Rose Garden ceremony with Willie Nelson, Snoop Dogg, and Cheech and Chong, legalize marijuana on the federal level. Do not need Congress to do so. You can do that right now to put some points on the board for Democrats to actually run on. You can lower the drinking age from 21 to 18, raise the speed limit from 70 to 80 nationwide. There are all sorts of things in your toolbox as a Democratic president you can do. They just have seemingly not wanted to do it yet. So I think if Democrats can start putting some points on the board, the fact that Herschel Walker is probably going to be the Republican nominee, I think Warnock can get reelected, but they're going to have an electoral agenda. And also Democrats have this bad habit of getting elected and then forgetting everybody who got them elected. If you notice, Republicans, when they're in office, they have these rallies all the time. They're out with the people, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz talking and everything else. Democrats get into power and seem to feel like they need to put 3 levels of distance between you and the common folks. And I think they have to get out of that habit and give it to the common touch, talking to those organizations, not just having the cool kids club, making sure that everyone has part of it.
That's not just the Democrats, though. And you hadn't heard the Republicans say a word about choice and Roe v. Wade. That's something they've been handing their voters for a long time. Now they look like they got it. They're mighty quiet about it. They don't seem to be particularly proud of it, I guess because it's not popular.
Yeah, that's one of those things that's like when the dog chases the car. He never actually knows what he's going to do when he catches it. They've been running on this idea of curtailing abortion in America for the last 50 years. Now they've gotten to a point where they may have actually found the proper legislation that can survive Supreme Court scrutiny, at least for the next until precedent is established. And I don't think they actually want it. I think most of these Republican women who have been yelling about it, they understand the benefits to them. I think most of the people who are in the upper middle class understand that it has benefited them, these policies, and they are not going to be very, very excited by the fact that, well, now some of these voters are going to actually expect you to do it. I think that's why they're kind of pushing it under the rug before it starts metastasizing and spreading throughout the country, because they don't want it any more than anyone else wants it, and they've just been posturing on it for decades.
It was based on their base. Go ahead.
I think one thing about Warnock's election is that African Americans in particular have not forgotten the Trump backlash. have not forgotten Trump, number one, haven't forgotten the backlash, and have not ignored that the Republican Party has swept the South with these crazy voting laws to try to stop African Americans from voting. And one thing I think about a lot is that when you try to stop us in such a dramatic and obvious way, it tends to spur us to say, no, you can't stop us. And Warnock's appeal might be the thing that gets people out to vote, not just his appeal, but the fact that he was put in office or perceived to have been put in office by black women and black people in Georgia, that they would not fall down on him now and not go out and vote for him, but go out and vote to prove that, yes, we have the power. You tried to stop us, but you can't do it. I find a lot of that in the African American community. I hope it works. That's just me.
I think in normal political times that would be the exact way things would work. But if you've noticed, Republicans have done something interesting. Larry Elders in California, Tim Scott, South Carolina, Vernon Jones running for governor, Herschel Walker running for Senate, Kelvin King running for Senate. They're trying to cleave a space between black women and black men electorally. In the last election, for example, Donald Trump got 20% of the black male vote nationwide. So what they're trying to do is peel off from that appeal that Warnock may have, make him the black woman candidate, but then start peeling off black men in order, if you can get a coalition of 25% of the black men with that MAGA base, that's enough to win any election. So this is why I'm saying the Democrats have to put more points on the board, because you have to start refilling those coffers. And that's going to come from young voters. That's going to start from registering unregistered African Americans. But if you haven't passed criminal justice reform, you haven't passed police reform, you haven't passed voting rights, you haven't passed the Border People Act, and you're roping up Haitians and sending them out the country, that's not exactly the best way to recruit black folks to turn out in record numbers for you again. So this is why I'm saying they have to put some points on the board. Right now, you're not giving Warnock anything to run on.
Well, neither have the Republicans passed anything that would appear to benefit African Americans. It's an old problem. It's on steroids, Jay, and I agree with you.
What is the appeal to black men in the GOP? To what do you attribute that 20%?
I attribute it to, I'd say I did an interview on this recently, and someone said it's the machismo factor. It's the, I'm not going to be told what to do factor that appeals to a lot of black men, that the Democrats have become, it's almost a flip of the 1980s, when you had the moral majority, the Christian conservatives, the evangelicals, enforcing societal standards. Now it is flipped to where the white progressives and social justice warriors are kind of controlling that narrative on what you can and cannot do socially, who can say and who cannot say things socially. And because of that, many black men feel that they don't want to have a voice in the Democratic Party. Here comes Trump running along, talking about grab him by the you-know-what, married to a porn star, flying on a gold jet, all those things, and kind of that macho, machismo, testosterone-fueled, I'm not going to do what anybody says factor tends to be what many people, what appeals to a lot of African American men. Also, he's able to run down. Look, I was able to get through the criminal justice reform for people. I was able to get through the opportunity zone for black business. I was able to lower African American unemployment to the lowest level ever. Now, clearly that wasn't his doing, but it happened on his watch, so he can claim it. And because of those things and his close relationship with hip hop, that I think a lot of people have forgotten. They know you can go through 100 different rap songs where they say I'm rich like Donald Trump, appearing on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, hanging out with Mike Tyson, parties with Diddy in New York. A lot of that pre-politics Donald Trump is still appealing to a lot of people in that celebrity culture. Not to mention Donald Trump's hip hop endorsements are far greater than Joe Biden's hip hop endorsements. Kanye West.
How much of that is hatred of women?
I don't know how much of that is hatred of women. And the reason I'll say that is that, someone like Kanye West is not really known for misogynistic lyrics, but he's a big Donald Trump supporter. Nicki Minaj all of a sudden is a Donald Trump supporter because she's against the vaccine mandate. You're seeing the guy who sung Nuck If You, or the producer, Lil J, who did Nuck If You Buck with Crime Mob, is a Donald Trump supporter. You can kind of run down the list, and part of it is that we have the white
But
liberals.
isn't hip hop misogynistic too? I mean, isn't that the whole point, that women are eye candy and you can treat them any kind of way, you can grab them anywhere, you can put them on a plane and traffic them while they're teenagers? I mean, isn't that the whole point, or at least one of the points?
It's one
Story.
Yeah, it is. I do think that that's part of it. But one of the interesting things I've found over the last few years is they've actually decreased that in hip hop. That if you listen to lyrics now, very few have those 90s ultra misogynistic lyrics. What they figured out is if you just have women say it instead, they can't accuse you of being misogynistic. So the same thing.
We can. Actually, we can.
Yeah, the same lyrics you would hear Snoop Dogg say in 1990, Meg Thee Stallion says now. The same stuff that NWA was talking about in the 80s, the city girls talk about now, and the same rich white folks still get rich off it either way. So they've just figured out a way to transmute it and to turn misogyny into the new feminism. This is when you have, Maxine Waters talking about how great of a song WAP is, or Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion. That's just old school misogyny that they've turned into feminism through the media. So this is part of the reason I think that so many people are getting away from those white liberal social standards. And that's why it's not so much that they support Trump. They just kind of land there because they don't want to be on the other side.
And I think that has a lot to do with hate of women, particularly black women, by black men.
And resentment of this so-called, the educated, good job. I mean, I think you told me at one point that most of your friends' wives make more money than they do.
Yeah, and most of us are happy about it.
Well, happy and resentful at the same time.
No.
Passive or aggressive. It's always fun talking to you, Robert.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. It's a joy.
You have a home here anytime. I need to hear that. You keep me sharp and focused. Davida, any final thoughts or?
Well, I'm looking forward to the Creating Opportunity Conference. I've gone for 22 years, Jan, and I'm looking forward to the virtual conference, creatingopportunity.org. Is that right, Robert?
.com, creatingopportunity.com.
.com. It's going to be October 14th through 15th. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, in 2 days, October 14th and 15th, virtually. You can register. We have the registration stuff up everywhere. So creatingopportunityconference.com, rainbowpushatlanta.com, rainbowpush.org. You can register at any of those places. And people feel free to reach out to me at any time for more information, or if you want to, participate in the conference in any way. We still got about a month to finish the planning. Some
great free information. It will change your life, and it does create opportunity. I'm so proud of you and thankful that you are continuing that tradition and doing so much. I see you on all the talk shows, and I'm always very proud. I don't always agree, but I always consider your opinion very important. Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me.
Very proud of you.
Thank you for joining us for Sisters-in-Law. Real sisters, real lawyers, really good talk. We're very thankful for our special guest, Robert Patillo, attorney and executive director of the Rainbow Push Southeastern Regional Office in Atlanta. Thank you, Janice. It's always good to talk to you, and I always feel like I'm interviewing you when we have Sisters-in-Law every Sunday.